In case you missed it, here's a Sports Animal Rewind.
No one knows the BCS better. College football analyst for ESPN, ESPN.com, friend of the show, Brad Edwards joins us here on the new Sentinel Sports Page. Hey, Brad, Vince Ferrara, Ben Frederickson here in Knoxville. Great to talk to you again, Brad. How you doing?
Doing well. Got a little unexpected drama here in the last week. I thought Alabama and Florida State were just going to win out, and the BCS was going to go quietly into the night, but wasn't meant to be. And I guess, you know what, considering what the BCS has been, we shouldn't have expected it to go quietly.
Absolutely. Now, is this going into the conference championships, Brad? Remind us, is this the closest the SEC has been to being left out on the outside, at least at this point in the process?
You know, let me think back, because like the last couple of years when Alabama has lost in November and got back into it, they were already back on solid ground going into the final weekend. You know, I mean, there was obviously that chance 2 years ago after Oklahoma State just blew out Oklahoma, you know, that they could get jumped, but it was always like you felt like they were in the stronger position. You know, going back 2010, Auburn was undefeated, 9 Alabama was undefeated. Florida, I don't think, was ever in doubt. We knew that the winner of the SEC championship game in 2008 was going to end up playing for the national title. And then, you know, LSU, probably back to then, because remember that was the crazy day, 2007. When Les Miles had his famous pre-SEC game,
yes,
conference where he came out there and denied, you know, having taken the Michigan job and said, "Have a great day," and then there proceeded to be losses by number 1 Missouri and number 2 West Virginia on that day. I would say that was probably a day where maybe the odds were stacked even more against the SEC getting into the championship game than they are this week.
I guess can you take us through the SEC teams that think they might be able to get a chance at kind of who is leading? If an SEC team is going to make it, who's leading it and who's behind them?
Well, I would say that Auburn and Missouri have, I think, basically the same shot, which is that, you know, Florida State or Ohio State were to lose, the SEC champion is in the game. Now, I would say Auburn is slightly in a better position than Missouri just because there is a remote chance that Auburn could jump over an undefeated Ohio State. I don't think it's very likely. I think Ohio State would have to play an incredibly close game against Michigan State where you just came away from watching the game feeling like that Ohio State was not the better team. That would open the door. But even then, the number of voters that would have to switch their positions and put Auburn at number 2, I think is probably unrealistic. So I think it's, you know, basically comes down to whether Ohio State loses. I mean, let's face it, Florida State's not going to lose to Duke. So, you know, probably just take that one out of the conversation. So if Ohio State loses, that's what you have. And then in the off chance that Florida State and Ohio State were both to lose, you could end up with an all-SEC championship game because it could very easily be Alabama against the SEC champion if that were to happen.
We're talking BCS and college football with Brad Edwards from ESPN, ESPN.com here on the new Sentinel Sports Page. Brad, is there any possibility that if the SEC championship game is ugly, defensive, and people are looking for something to hold against the SEC, and I don't anticipate that happening, but just for the sake of hypotheticals, if it's an ugly, unimpressive win, say for Missouri, any chance that Missouri stays behind Alabama if, say, Ohio State loses and that spot for the SEC was to open up?
Yeah, I don't see it just because the margin between Alabama and Missouri right now in the BCS is very small. It's much smaller than the margin between Ohio State and Auburn is right now. And the computer impact alone of Missouri beating Auburn would send them easily past Alabama. I mean, even if all the voters that currently have Missouri behind Alabama kept them there, which I can't imagine happening, but even if that were to take place in the polls, the computers would be plenty to move Missouri ahead. So I really can't envision a scenario where that could take place. Because even if there was let's say there was a really bad call and Auburn deserved to win, but the the refs robbed them and it was something that wasn't reviewable and Missouri won the game because of it. I think in that scenario you might have as many people who would still rank Auburn ahead of Missouri as there would who would put Alabama ahead of Missouri. I don't know. I mean, it would take something absolutely bizarre that I can't even think of right now.
Brad, talk about the criteria that the voters, the varying criteria that the voters will look at in determining who the better team is, if it does end up being an Ohio State, an Auburn, or even if it's Missouri versus Ohio State in deciding that second spot, because everyone can interpret this a different way on how they look at who's a good team and who is not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that people look at is just, we call it the eye test. They watch the teams play and who do you think is better? And I think if you're putting Ohio State and Auburn against each other, I think that's a tough call. I mean, I've watched them both play almost every game this year. And, I think if they played 10 times, it could go 5-5. I think they're pretty close on the field. If you do the resume test, you just, even including Auburn's one loss, I think Auburn's overall body of work is more impressive because they've beaten many more good teams than Ohio State has to this point, and obviously that's really the basis of Auburn's argument. But then, the other thing is that there is an element out there, and I don't know how big it is, but there's certainly a group of people who are just philosophically opposed to putting a one-loss team ahead of a major undefeated team, no matter what the resumes might say. And depending on how many of those people exist, that might end up making the difference. Because, like I said, if Auburn's not going to be ahead of Ohio State in the computers, which I don't think there's any way they will be, they have to be ahead of them in the polls, and not just ahead, but ahead by a comfortable margin. And if there are enough voters out there who, no matter what happens on the field, as long as Ohio State gets the W, they're not going to move Auburn ahead of them, then Auburn has no chance. Now, I say that with one caveat, which is that there's always the possibility that other voters could manipulate their ballots. And I can't imagine there are too many who would consider doing it, but you could have somebody put Auburn at number 1 and drop Ohio State to number 6, hoping to help out Auburn. You could also have it go the other way. Someone who hates the SEC and doesn't want to see them get another team back in the game could put Ohio State up there and drop Auburn several spots back. And the good news is the final ballots are all published, so if anybody does something fishy, their name will be attached to it. We'll know who they are. But one, if there's going to be a conspiracy theory, I'll throw this one out there. The Harris poll was created by the BCS for the BCS, and because of that, it's going away. This coming Sunday will be the final Harris college football poll ever. And so if you're a voter in that poll, you don't have to worry about them taking away your vote next year if you do something that seems a little odd, a little questionable, because everyone who votes in that poll is going to lose their vote after this week because it's gone. So if there's a chance for some foul play, I would look to the Harris poll, but I just feel like if Ohio State goes out there on Saturday and beats Michigan State in a way that you have absolutely no question that Ohio State was the better team, I just don't think there are going to be enough voters, willing to put Auburn ahead of them.
Brad Edwards from ESPN joining us. Brad, what do you think would be the best matchup in the BCS National Championship game if you could pair two teams together that, say, have at least a realistic shot of being there?
I think that I think Ohio State's offense is built to have better success against a defense like Florida State than Auburn's is. Florida State is they're very very big and physical on the defensive line, but they're smaller and faster at linebacker. And so I think that they're better equipped than Alabama is, for example, to be able to handle the speed of Nick Marshall. And to be able to run down somebody like Corey Grant on a lot of those sweep plays that Auburn likes to run. And so I think that if there's one thing, and Florida State's defense has handled every team they faced so far. The only team that had a little bit of success on them offensively was Boston College, and they've got that big running back Andre Williams who actually rushed for $150 on them that day. And I would think if there's one thing that they might be susceptible to, and nobody who's really good at running the ball has had a chance to play them, would be just the power between the tackles running game. And Ohio State has that with Carlos Hyde, and then they also have the element of the running quarterback as well with Braxton Miller. So I think Ohio State's offense could give Florida State defense some trouble, but I don't think either the Ohio State defense or the Auburn defense would give Florida State's offense any trouble. I think Florida State is one of, now I say this, but before I say this, let me clarify. They've played an incredibly weak schedule, and because of that, I think we may have a distorted view on them. But based on what I've seen on the field, I think this Florida State team is one of the best teams in the entire BCS era.
Interesting. So what do you think is the most accurate criteria to look at when judging teams? Is it the eye test? Is that the best? Is it resume? I mean, you mentioned a lot of different ones. What do you think is the best to earn a spot in the BCS title game?
Well, to me, it's the eye test. I mean, I personally want to see the two best teams play, and that's why I give Florida State a pass, even though you could argue their schedule is even weaker than Ohio State's is, because most of their games are over at halftime, and they have not had a single game all year that has been in doubt going into the fourth quarter. And so, I like Florida State for that reason. Now, there are some limitations. I still believe, without any doubt at all, that Alabama is the second best team. But you can't put them in there over Auburn. And so it's never as simple as just who are the two best teams. There are places where head-to-head and things like that matter. And so, there is a fine line. I think that's why the selection committee is a good way to go, because at least they're going to have these conversations, and they're going to hash out all the arguments for and against each team, and then they'll come to a conclusion. I'm not in favor of the idea of just the resume itself. Who did you beat? Who did you lose to? Being a be all end all with no regard for the actual scores of the games, which is the way that the BCS computers operate. I think how easily you handle opponents does make a difference as far as how good of a team you are. But even when we move forward with the selection committee, I think anybody who believes that the selection committee's job is to pick the four best teams, they're misinformed, because that's not at all what they're going to do. We've already been told that they're going to look at criteria like schedule strength, did you win a conference championship, common opponents, things like that. And if you're putting any criteria on it at all, then your job is not simply to pick the four best teams. You're picking the best teams in relation to the criteria. And my opinion is, if the selection committee were picking four teams right now, assuming games go as expected this Saturday, I think you'd have Florida State and Ohio State. You'd have the SEC champion as the third team in. And I believe the fourth team the selection committee would choose would not be Alabama. I think it would be Oklahoma State. And I don't know how many people on that committee would believe that Oklahoma State was better than Alabama, but their criteria are schedule strength, and that would be pretty even between Oklahoma State and Alabama. And then conference championship, and Oklahoma State would have one, Alabama wouldn't. And even with common opponents, they both had one. They had one common opponent. They both played Mississippi State, and they both beat them by double digits. But Oklahoma State beat them by about a touchdown more than Alabama did. And so, based on what we've been told, that would be the direction they would go. And I don't think there's any question if they did that, they wouldn't have the four best teams.
Interesting. What are your thoughts on the two teams in the SEC championship? How do you see that one playing out based on what you've seen so far this season?
I said a week ago that I thought Missouri was the best one-loss team in the country, and even though I thought they played really tight against A&M, given everything that was on the line, I still think that they're every bit as good as Auburn, and I think the circumstances of the game favor Missouri. Two things. One is that Auburn's got to find a way to come down from this incredible high after just an unbelievable win. And then the other thing is that all week, everybody's talking about Auburn. Auburn, Ohio State, who deserves it, whatever, and nobody's talking about Missouri. I think Missouri's going to feel really disrespected because of that. And then, you know what? I think on some level, I think Missouri's defense matches up okay with Auburn's offense, because Missouri's got some really talented guys on the defensive line who can win one-on-one battles and really have been doing that well all season. And I think because of that, they can get into the backfield and get a lot of tackles for loss. And as you know, with Auburn's offense, not throwing the ball that well, if you can get some tackles for loss every now and then on first or second down against them, put them in an obvious passing situation on third down, you've got a chance to have success. And I don't think by any stretch they're going to shut down Auburn's offense, but I think they'll make enough plays, and I think Missouri will be more aggressive offensively than Alabama was. I felt like Alabama really played timidly for a lot of that game. Like, it was they were playing not to make mistakes more than they were, playing to win. And I think Missouri will go after it, and it should be a great game. But I slightly favor Missouri in this one.
Brad, last thing real quick. We appreciate your time. What did you think of the Steve Sarkisian hire at USC?
I wasn't surprised by it because I've been hearing for several weeks that he was a guy that they were very interested in, and obviously he has the USD connections, and so he knows the school, he knows the area as far as recruiting and all that, and he's been recruiting that area as head coach at Washington for the last several years already. So the relationships are there. And I guess if there's anything that was kind of surprising about it to some people, it was that after the Lane Kiffin disaster, that they did not decide to go in a different direction and basically cut ties with the Pete Carroll era. And it's something that we all remember. Alabama did it for a while after Bear Bryant. They hired Ray Perkins, and then when Bill Curry didn't work out, they went back to Gene Stallings, and it's like they kept looking to just keep that alive. And it feels like that's what USC's doing right now. Sarkisian is a completely different personality from Lane Kiffin, but they haven't let the string end. It was Carroll and then Kiffin and then even Orgeron, a former assistant at USC under Pete Carroll, and now Sarkisian. So I think if there's any criticism of it, that's what it is, which is that maybe it would be a good idea right now for USC to just depart from any ties to Pete Carroll and just kind of start over.